In this section, we are going to talk about Vietnamese textile and clothing industry in detail. Vietnam happens to be a very, very strong case of such a country which within the last decade has grew at a very fast pace, especially in the clothing export space, and has occupied a very strong position in the top 10 clothing exporter in the world. If you look at the apparel industry in Vietnam, Vietnam is the fourth largest exporter for textiles, garments and clothing worldwide after China, the EU and Bangladesh, even more than India, although Vietnam happens to be a small country. And in 2018, the apparel industry reached an export turnover of more than $36 billion, making it the third strongest export commodity in the country. Now, if you look at the Vietnamese economy, clothing manufacturing and exports is one of the most significant export commodity for together with more than 2.7 million people employed in textile and garment industry across 6,000 textile companies. The sector is an important pillar in the country's economy, just like Bangladesh. Vietnam is highly dependent on the import of raw materials. Vietnam is a small country, does not have such a robust capacity to grow cottons or to grow other plant-based fibers or to manufacture synthetic fibers. So Vietnam is highly dependent on the import of raw materials such as cotton, fibers, yarns and other textile material which are required for clothing production, as domestic supply has not been sufficient in the previous years. So if you talk about the domestic supply of raw material, it has not been sufficient. It is far less than being sufficient for providing for the domestic supply as well as for taking care of the exports. In 2018, domestic cotton production amounted to about 2,000 tons, and at the same time the cotton exports were nearly 100-fold at around 1.6 million tons. So what we're saying here is that the cotton produced in Vietnam was 2,000 tons, but it exported cotton worth 1.6 million tons, which is about 100 times. So this means that what Vietnam exported was, let's say, 100, but what it produced domestically was just 1. So the rest 99 had to be imported, and then value addition was done by Vietnam, and then it was exported. So that is the kind of shortfall that we are talking about. Now, the major competitive advantage enjoyed by Vietnam is that labor cost for clothing production in Vietnam is even lower than China, Indonesia and Cambodia. The average monthly wages in the garment and textile industry range from $212 to $235 US. Now, the export sector of Vietnam, it relies on the production of foreign-owned companies and local private-owned companies as subcontractors, while local companies also produce for the domestic market. Now, this point is very important to note. What has happened, what has been seen in the entire world is that poor countries have been given different types of supports by countries and regions like USA and European Union, and same was the case for Vietnam. Vietnam was given a status of most favored nation, and it was also given a status of zero duty, meaning to say that all products made in Vietnam, when it reached the ports in Europe and USA, no custom duties were levied on those products. Now, the moment such a policy or such a scheme or such an MOU or such a trade agreement is signed between a developed nation and a poor nation, automatically the manufacturers in other countries which have become expensive to produce in, these manufacturers, they shift their production facilities to these poor countries. So same is the case with Vietnam. Vietnam got the status of most favorable nation and of zero duty, and the moment Vietnam got this status, the manufacturers from the neighboring countries, from China, from Japan, from India, they shifted their manufacturing facilities to Vietnam. Now, today what happens is that the export sector relies on the production of foreign-owned companies, and the local private-owned companies, they reach as high as being subcontractors, not more than that. So the local private-owned companies, they act as subcontractors to these foreign-owned companies, or these local companies, they produce for the domestic market. The major exports is being done from Vietnam by the foreign-owned companies, not by the companies which are owned by Vietnamese. And the revenue of major listed textile companies, it reached about 63 billion Vietnamese dong in 2018. One of the largest textile company in Vietnam, which is Vietnam National Textile and Garment Group, it is the leading textile company in terms of market capitalization and revenue, and it operates 12 yarn factories, 5 weaving factories, 5 knitting factories, and 24 sewing companies. That's large by all standards, even if compared with factories, with companies in China. Despite Vietnam being a small country with 3 international airports and over 44 seaports, Vietnam's infrastructure facilitates the international trade with foreign countries. It's very easy for Vietnam, in terms of processing of the shipments by sea or by air. Now, Vietnam's exports of clothing worldwide increased by 13%, surpassing India and Turkey in 2018. India is a large country, Turkey is again a large country, Vietnam is a small country, and yet Vietnam has been able to beat India and Turkey in 2018. Now, major export destinations of Vietnam textile and clothing includes United States of America, European Union, Japan, and South Korea. The government has also released plans to further enhance the expressway and railway infrastructure. Now, the expressway and railway infrastructure is very, very important in the sense that when a shipment has been readied and it has now to be immediately shifted from the factory to the port, to the airport, or to the seaport, it is this expressway or the railway infrastructure which will be used. And if the expressway and railway infrastructure is state of the art, then the amount of time required to send the shipment from the factory to the port is drastically reduced, and every single day matters a lot and saves a lot of money. So that is precisely the reason why the Vietnamese government has released the plans to further enhance the expressway and railway infrastructure. One of the most important developments is the several international trade agreements, including the European Union Vietnam Free Trade Agreement and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. EVFTA and CPTPP, these are the most important trade agreements which Vietnam had with the major markets, which is EU and USA. And these two trade agreements have led to a great advantage for the Vietnam's export. And because of this trade agreement, Vietnam is able to achieve a lower price in the foreign markets, while India is not able to do that because India does not have such a free trade agreement with Europe and USA. Now, as Vietnam faces the risk of relying heavily on raw material exports and the pressure to meet domestic demand, the government has planned to support the development of raw materials for the textile and clothing industries to reach 65% of domestic supply for the textile and clothing industry. Now, the Vietnam textile and clothing industry is not in a position to take care of the domestic demand and cannot take care of the exports at all. In terms of Vietnam does not have the raw material base, neither to take care of the domestic demand nor for the exports. So the government has planned to support the development of the raw materials to such an extent that they are aiming that at least 65% of the domestic supply for the textile and clothing industry, at least that is taken care of by the raw material being developed within Vietnam. So for that, more farming, more spinning and weaving mills have to be put in place, and that is what the government is working on. Together with a strong setup of the sector and the advantages of competitive labor costs and logistics infrastructure, the government had planned to reach an export turnover of $40 billion in 2019, and Vietnam has been able to come very close to the target, thanks to the efforts by the government as well as the efforts made by the Vietnamese textile and clothing industry. We are now going to talk about export competitiveness of key exporting countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Europe. If you look at Asia, the largest exporters are China, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam. Now, we are talking about textile and clothing together. And if you look at Europe, we have Germany, Italy, Turkey, Spain. And if you look at Latin America, we have Peru, Brazil, Colombia. Although Peru, Brazil, Colombia, they do not figure in the top 10 exporting nations. But within Latin America, they are the largest exporter of clothing. And if you look at Africa, we have Mauritius and we have Lesotho, which are the largest apparel exporter, and their exports have been growing at a very rapid pace as compared with other countries in Africa. Now we're going to talk about export competitiveness. Export competitiveness, as per the formal definition, is that first we look at the change in a region's exports in relation to the changes in the global exports. If global exports rise and a region's exports rise by a similar amount, there is no change in its export competitiveness. But if the region's exports rise more than the global exports, the region then is said to be becoming more competitive. Now in slide number 54, if you see, I have provided the link for the website in which the export competitiveness has been, the data that is required to measure export competitiveness. The data has been populated, and using two parameters, two tabs, one can find out the export competitiveness of any country for a particular period. So if you see the screenshot, the country that has been chosen is India, and the date range has been chosen as the first quarter of 2009 till the fourth quarter of 2018. So we're looking at the financial year the calendar year 2009 till calendar year 2018. And then you just have to hit update chart, and the chart is going to be presented. And in the chart, the green areas are the areas in which the country has grown more than the world trade, and the red zones are those areas in which the world trade has been higher and the trade for the growth of the trade for the country has been lower. So the green areas are the areas of competitiveness, and the red regions are the regions of non-competitiveness. So in the next slide, slide 55, you can see that you choose the country, you choose the time period, you hit update chart, and you'll get the chart in front of you, and you can see the export competitiveness of a country in textile and clothing in the time period which has been chosen by you. And these charts can reveal those periods of competitiveness and non-competitiveness, and these charts for a country can be compared with the charts of other countries, and further analysis can be done and inferences can be drawn. So if you see the export competitiveness of China, we can see that in the period 2009 to 2018, we can see that 2009 was good for China, 2010 was good, 2011 was bad because China is in the red zone, 2012 and 13 has been good for China, 2014 early part was not good, latter part is good, 2015 is good, 2016 and 2017 has been, latter part of 2016 has been bad, former part of initial part of 2017 has been bad, and 2018 had between 2017 latter half and 2000 initial half has been barely, the exports have been barely, the growth has been barely equal to that of world, and beyond 2018 the 2018 full the middle part, China is seen to be growing at a rate less than that of the world. So this is the export competitiveness chart for China. And similarly we see it for Germany. For Germany the chart is slightly different, and we can see that from 2009 till 2013 it has been bad for Germany as compared to the world growth of exports, and from 2013 till 2016 till the third quarter it has been great for Germany, and then again from 2016 end to 2017 middle it is in the red zone, and then Germany again entered the green zone just before 2018 and the initial part of 2018. Similarly, we can see it for Bangladesh, and you can see that Bangladesh has very large portions of green zone and very less portions of red zone in the same period 2009 to 2018 as compared with Germany and China. And if you see Vietnam, it is fully justified. Vietnam just has a small odd red region just before 2010 and start of 2010 and in the middle of 2018. The rest of the period between 2009 to 2018, all of that is green, and that is what is reflected in the figures also. Vietnam has been steadily climbing the ranks in the top 10 clothing exporters list, and it has also been growing at a very fast pace in terms of absolute value, and that is commensurate with what we see in this a chart which exhibits the Vietnam's export competitiveness in the period 2009 to 2018. And then we see India. For India, it's a mixed bag. 2009 till 2012 has been good, but then if you see the growth, the green regions are not very wide, and then of course the red regions are also not wide, which is good. And India has not a large portions of green, also does not have large portions of red, and to a large extent, India has been growing pretty much at the same pace at which the world export has grown. So India has been doing average, or India has been doing pretty okay in terms of when compared with the growth of world export. But as compared to China, Germany, or Bangladesh or Vietnam, India has not really been performing that great in terms of clothing exports. But in terms of textile exports, India has climbed the ranks from 6th position to the 2nd position in this same period, 2009 to 2018. And that is, and India has lost positions in the top 10 slot when we talk about clothing exports. So it is a combination of increase in textile exports and decrease in apparel exports in terms of ranking, that we see the combined effect of those two performances of textile and clothing, and we see a chart which is fairly moving along with the world export growth. So the 5 top countries of Asia, their competitiveness have been measured and have been shown in the charts. As an exercise, the students are required to measure the export competitiveness of the major textile and clothing countries in Latin America, in Africa, and in European Union. We will now talk about the global textile and clothing exports, the key highlights, some of those details which are not evident while looking at the charts and graphs and tables, but only upon close inspection we are able to see some of those definite patterns, and those are the patterns which will be discussed in the subsequent slides. China exports more than the rest of the top 5 combined. So if you look at the top 10 countries, if you look at the combined figures of the countries ranking from 2nd till the 6th, the amount of exports of textile and clothing that the countries occupying 2nd position to 6th position, all of that is surpassed by China's exports singly. Now, China, despite being the largest exporter of textile and clothing, it is losing market share to the rest of the world. The reasons, as surmised by World Bank, is political uncertainty, and the second most probable reason cited by World Bank is trade war with America. So because of which what has been seen is that China has been steadily increasing its exports of textiles, but has been steadily also losing its share in the clothing exports. And China's losses have been picked up by Bangladesh and Vietnam. Both of them seem to have gained from China's loss. Now we come to slide number 63. Italy, Turkey and Germany are in the top 10, but they have all lost market share. And the most probable reason that has been cited by World Bank is higher labor costs. Italy, Turkey and Germany, all of them have lost 1 or 2 positions in the top 10 list. It can also be seen that USA is the biggest exporter in North America and Mexico is the second biggest exporter. Very little clothing is imported from Africa or South America. Now this is despite cheaper labor. But the biggest teething issue is that these regions, the countries in Africa and South America, geopolitically they are too unstable, and therefore the brands they don't want to source from these countries. Therefore, the big apparel manufacturers of the world who have been setting up their factories in China, in Bangladesh, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, in Mauritius, in Egypt, they have not set up their factories in the unstable countries of Africa or South America. Brazil and Egypt are the biggest exporters in South America and Africa respectively. Although Brazil and Egypt, they do not figure in the top 10 list of exporters in the world. So far we have been talking about the textile and clothing exports. But it's very important to look at those underlying reasons because of which any country is able to achieve competitiveness. And we shall discuss various factors which are important ingredients of competitiveness. The first one that we are going to discuss is a monthly minimum wage in the garment industry. Now what we have is a data which has been shared by Micro Opportunities. Micro Opportunities is a non-profit organization, and they have found that more than 60% of the times Bangladeshi women garment workers, they earn less than the minimum wages. So more than half of the time Bangladeshi women, they do not even get the minimum wages. Now this is something which is violation of the human rights. And Bangladesh being a very competitive exporter of apparel in the world, but not giving even the minimum wages 60% of the times to its workers, is something which is not appreciated. Yet the big brands of the world, they continue to give orders to the Bangladeshi factories. The garment workers in America, they earn more than the federal minimum wage. Now this is something surprising and interesting, and something which is really appreciated, that the minimum wages which have been prescribed by the American government, the garment workers there in America, they're paid far more than that, which is starkly opposite to the scenario that we see in Bangladesh, in Pakistan and in India. Rarely in such countries do we find that the garment workers are being paid more than the minimum wage. Now we are in slide 65, and the data has been compiled by Soport, and the source of the data is Public Radio International. And as per the findings, the monthly minimum wage for garment workers, which they found in 2017, was USA was a very high of 1,864 US dollars. That was the monthly minimum wages in America. And Turkey at $933 per month, Honduras $650, Thailand $632, Malaysia $557, Philippines $372, China at a low of $270, and Vietnam at $248, which is less than China, and Indonesia $231, and Mexico $207. Now, one thing that can be seen over here is that USA pays more than Asia, but the irony is that Mexico pays even less than Asia. If you look at the developed countries like Turkey and America, they pay garment workers the most. And China is no longer the cheapest source of labor. Earlier, China was one of the cheapest source of labor, but today it is not. Garment workers in Mexico, they are paid 25% lower than those in China. So Mexico is even less than China. And Thailand and Malaysia both pay its garment workers more than what China pays its garment workers. In fact, Thailand and Malaysia, they pay its garment workers more than twice as much as China pays its garment workers. Now, when we are looking at the wages being paid to the garment workers, it also is important to look at the wage growth, the rate at which the wages have been growing over a period of time for every country. So it is important to know how much labor costs are increasing. That's number one. And the second fact is that the country that is cheap today may not be so cheap a few years from now. So whether to set up a factory in a country or not, it is important not just to evaluate the labor cost currently. It is also important to see at what rate the labor costs have been increasing over the past decade. And that is something which can help in making the decision as to whether investments should be made in the country or not. Now, there is this report by Werner International Labor Cost Comparison in 2014, and again compiled by Soport, and this shows the wage growth of garment workers by country from between the period 2000 to 2014, and it is very alarming to see that China's wage has grown by 285% in the period 2000 to 2014. Indonesia grew by 195%, Turkey by 102%, Thailand by 90%, Malaysia by 88%. But Mexico, the wages have grown only by 39%. And America has only increased by 25%. Despite having grown only by 25%, it still happens to pay the highest in the world to the garment workers. Now the wages are an important factor, and we'll see in the next point, and that is apparel exports from China and Indonesia. They have been steadily declining, and that has been largely because of the rising cost of labor. And the irony is that the rising cost of labor cannot be controlled by the government. Although it's very surprising to see that um, Mexico has low garment worker wages that aren't growing quickly. Mexico is not paying much, and the wages are not even growing quickly. So, given the current scenario, if USA continues to move away from China due to rising costs and political tensions, then the next best option for America would be Mexico. And if a large part of business shifts from is being given by USA to Mexico, then a lot of trade decline will be suffered by China. There was another interesting study which was done by United States Fashion Industry Association, and this study was done in 2018, and it was a benchmarking study. And USFIA, the survey, it surveyed the top executives at major fashion brands in USA to analyze their thoughts on the state of the industry. Now, this research is has a serious limitation that the survey was done only in USA, and therefore the results are heavily biased towards USA. But other than that, some very important aspects are also some of the very important aspects emerge from this study. Now, this 2018 benchmarking study, the executives rated certain countries on a scale of 1 to 5, various characteristics. Now, the countries that they talked about was USA, Mexico, Colombia, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, India, Cambodia, and Bangladesh. And the parameters were speed to market, which is the lead time, overall cost, and the risk of compliance. A speed to market is if an order is given to a country, how much time do they take? Lesser the amount of time that a country takes, higher is the rating. Overall cost is the net cost which is required to be paid by the buyer to the exporting country. And if the overall cost is high, then the rating is going to be less. And if the costs are less, then the rating will be high. And when we talk about the risk of compliance, compliance is the degree of adherence by a country or by a factory towards adherence to the local law as well as the international compliance rules, laws, which are upheld by the brand which is giving the order. So risk of compliance means if a country or a factory is known to violate the norms, then the risk of compliance will be high and the rating that will be given will be less. And if the risk of compliance is low, the country or the factory is known to strictly adhere to the norms, to the prescribed rules and other mandates, then the rating given will be higher. So what we see is that the executives of America, they have given very high rating to USA in terms of speed to market and in terms of risk of compliance. Of course, America is an expensive country, so therefore the overall cost in that the rating that America has got is only 1.5. But if you look at Bangladesh, the speed to market is very less because Bangladesh is situated far away from America. The overall cost is, in terms of overall cost, the rating that Bangladesh has got is the highest because Bangladesh is the cheapest, offers the cheapest prices. But in terms of risk of compliance, Bangladesh occupies the lowest position. Bangladeshi factories have been seen to have flouted the norms the maximum number of times, and some of the biggest accidents in textile and clothing industry has occurred in Bangladesh. And the compliance is something which is really uh, something that is not expected from Bangladesh. So the risk is very high when we talk about compliance. So that's why Bangladesh has a very low speed to market in terms of the lead times that they give and the amount of time that it takes for the shipment to leave from Bangladesh and to reach the destination. The risk of compliance also, Bangladesh has got a very low rating, and in terms of overall cost, the rating is the highest. And if you compare India with Bangladesh, then India fares better in comparison to Bangladesh in terms of speed to market, as India gives better lead times. But the overall cost, since the cost given by India is higher than what Bangladesh quotes, so therefore therefore India has got a rating of 3.5 as against 4.5 given to Bangladesh. And India has been a little more compliant, and therefore India has been given a rating of 3, where Bangladesh has got a rating of 2 only. So what is evident from this chart is that if you want very fast deliveries, and if you want very good prices also, then the risk of compliance will be very high. Meaning to say, if you want the cheapest, then it will be made under very shady conditions. And if you want very compliant factories, then the prices are also going to go up. You cannot have the cheapest and the best. That is a paradox that exists in any trade. You cannot have the cheapest of price, and you cannot expect the factories to be adhering to all the norms and paying its laborers good wages and using the best of the technologies and yet give you very good prices. It is not possible. So this is the paradox that exists especially in the textile and clothing trade. So that's why we have this. That's why it has been summarized in the next slide that it takes longer to get a finished product, and it's harder to comply with the local laws, but it's cheaper to produce there. So that is why when America or when Europe decides to buy from Bangladesh or Vietnam, they know that the compliances are being flouted. They know that the amount of time that it will take will be more, but then the prices are the best. So with a pinch of salt, the European and the American brands, they buy from Bangladesh and from Vietnam. Some of the other findings, if we talk about payment made to the garment workers, we already discussed this. America pays more than the Asian countries, and Asian countries pay more than Mexico. Mexico pays the least. And some other findings today, despite the establishment of World Trade Organization and despite all the different types of trade barriers are becoming major deterrents. The barriers being put in by various countries, mostly the developed nations, those are posing as the biggest hindrance to the exports of textile and clothing from the developing nations like India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Vietnam. Of course, developing countries, they have more labor violations than developed ones. Developed ones are more compliant. They are mature economies. They have surpluses. The entire population is mature and the factories they work in consonance with the rules laid down by the country. But in case of developing countries, the poor countries, the labor violations are more. And we can also see that the wages for garment workers in Asia has been growing rapidly, which can be said for China, for Thailand, for Cambodia, for most of the other major countries, including India. The wages for garment workers have been growing rapidly. It's a good thing for the labor, but it's a very strong negative factor for the exporting community of those countries. Before one makes a decision to work with a country or to invest in a country, one should take political and trade tensions among countries into account when gauging the export competitiveness of a country. So that a country could be cheap and could be very attractive, but one really has to also look at the political relations between that country and the importing country, or the trade tensions existing between the exporting country and the importing country. So this is something that should not be ignored. It is one of the major reasons, despite great prices, great design, great lead time, great everything, if the trade relations are not good, if the political relations are on the downside, the importing countries will not give orders to the exporting country. So with that, we come to the end of the session. Thank you.